Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Optimize Your Customer Discovery Process. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we'll try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch a couple polls just to step back, see how everyone in the room is doing today. First one is going to ask you, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? And we'll give it just a couple moments for everyone to submit a response here. Thank you. Thank you. All right, gonna go ahead and end this poll, share these results. All right, optimism in the lead. We always love to see that, but definitely seeing some feelings of surviving and anxiety as well. So hopefully some of our conversation today will help address those feelings. I'm gonna stop sharing this poll and launch that second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just helps us understand your current needs as an entrepreneur a little bit better so we can make sure we are providing timely and relevant programming and resources to all of you. Awesome. We got folks from Massachusetts, New York, Ohio. Awesome, awesome. DC, California, Singapore, Illinois, Alabama, Florida, Nigeria, Arizona, Texas. Welcome, welcome. Denmark, Sydney, UK. Awesome to have people joining from all over the world. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll, share these results. All right, looks like sales coming up in the lead, fitting for our topic today. Marketing coming up behind. Really, we got needs all across the board. So thank you. This is super helpful. We appreciate you all participating. I'm going to stop sharing that poll. And without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Kanika Mehta, founder and user experience consultant at Empathy Research Labs. Kanika, it is such a pleasure to have you here with us today, and I'm going to pass it right over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here. Thank you for tuning in. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, hopefully you're all able to see my screen okay. Like I said, super excited to be here and to be talking about customer discovery. Before we jump into what is it and why it's important and how do you do it in a way that's best for your own startup, I want to just spend a few minutes to introduce myself. So I'm Kanika Mehta, founder of Empathy Research Labs. Empathy Research is a boutique consulting company specializing in user and design research. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Prior to finding my own company, I was working as a UX researcher at Google for a few years, leading research for Google Workspace and Google Pixel line of products. And then post that, I joined one of Southeast Asia's biggest startups called Grab. They're basically a super app cutting across a lot of different stuff, including on-demand services, financial offerings, and more, where I led research for new user growth, customer loyalty, and customer engagement. Just a little bit about what we do here at Empathy Research. We basically partner with businesses large and small to help them create and scale delightful products, leveraging human-centered design principles and design thinking and user insights. We're based in Singapore, but working with clients internationally. And specifically with startups, we collaborate with the startups in a way that we partner with the founders, kind of providing them expert guidance to help them set up sustainable and effective strategies that empower the founders themselves to confidently be able to run their own iterative customer discovery the right way. So really helping them kind of, making sure that they're making the right product for the right markets and are crafting the right messages to reach those markets by understanding their users better, of course. That was a little bit about me and what I do, and let's kind of just dive into customer discovery. Before we do that, though, I just want to start with this fun little meme and just talking about what customer discovery is not before we jump into what it actually is. This happens so many times. I've seen that. I've seen people talk to their users, and it's usually done in a way that feels like they're really just wanting to hear good things about their ideas and just move on from there. So as we can see here, it's not about hearing people tell you how amazing your idea is or convincing them that your idea is really good and you're solving really big problems. Instead, on the contrary, it's really about questioning your core business assumptions. So customer discovery is a customer-centric scientific process that underpins an assumed product market fit. It provides evidence that leads founders to solutions without letting their biases get in the way. And not letting your bias get in the way is kind of one of the most important aspects of customer discovery. And we'll delve into that in the later slides and on how do you make sure you're not doing that. Basically, customer discovery helps you test your assumptions before investing more time, money, and effort into your idea, right? So you're trying to understand, you're trying to almost see if your assumption that the problem you're addressing is an actual problem is a true assumption. Or sometimes, a lot of times this happens, we may assume that our target segment has this problem, but that's not really the case. Once you've identified the problem, it helps you see if the solution that you're proposing is actually helping you solve the problem. The market you plan to target has that problem, and the market you plan to target will be willing to pay for your solution, right? So these are a few examples of the type of assumptions you can test using customer discovery, but of course, not just limited to this. That there's a lot more you can do with it. So just a quick little recap on why it's important. I know a lot of you on the call probably already know that it's important, which is why you're here. But we know from so much data that the number one reason for startups to fail is that there's no market need for their products or services, and that is exactly what customer discovery helps you avoid, right? It helps a rigorous customer discovery process basically ensures you're not falling into this trap of spending years making a product that eventually nobody wants to use, or they don't want to pay for it. I think now that we have a better understanding of what customer discovery is not, what it is, and why it's important, let's look at a few ways you can level up customer discovery for your own startup by one, adopting an open mindset during the planning phase, asking very insightful questions during your customer interviews, and then critically evaluating the feedback that you get from your customers in order to help you make great decisions. So yeah. So let's dive into the first bit, which is around having an open mindset or going into your customer discovery interviews with an open mindset. As founders, you've probably lived with an idea for a really long time, and so it's very easy to become a bit tunnel visioned and not see any flaws with your idea, and believe in it passionately, which is definitely very important. But in order for your product or your idea to succeed, you need to leave aside these biases and go into your customer discoveries with an open mindset, right? So maybe here are a few things that you can remind yourself before your interviews to make sure you're kind of setting yourself up for success. The first one is really remembering that you're there to kind of learn and not validate, right? You're not doing these interviews to just check the box that you've done them, or so that you're able to get, and I really hear this often from founders, is like, oh, we're just doing these interviews so that we get some customer quotes that we can put into our future decks, right? So then at that point, you're really just going in with the mindset of like, yeah, my idea is great, I'm just going to go ahead, talk to people, make sure they believe the same, and then get done, right? But you really want to use these interviews to truly and genuinely learn and better understand your customers, which means being able to detach and distance yourself from your idea, and be able to spot and absorb, so that you're in a better position to spot and absorb some of the negative feedback. One way to gauge whether you're doing your customer interviews well is to think about, hey, are these interviews challenging any of my current assumptions? If it's not challenging any of your assumptions at all, then I do think that you're doing something wrong. And you're probably just validating at that point and not learning anything new. Also, another way to look at it is, you're almost using these interviews to try to evaluate, okay, under what circumstances do my assumptions stand true, and under what circumstances they don't. So again, you're trying to understand and dig deeper into your assumptions so that you're able to have a better sense of what about it is working and what about it isn't working. The next one, I think, is also an important one. Again, just adopting this mindset when you do customer discoveries, is that bad news is actually good news. Imagine, you've spent 2.5, 3 years building something that you truly believe in, only to find out that that there aren't as many people wanting to use it as you'd initially imagined, right? So at that point, probably looking back, you would have wanted some of that bad news maybe 3 years ago, then having to learn it literally like 3 years later, when you've spent not just money, but also your own time and energy building something, right? So there's this quote I really like from a book that I also really like around customer discovery, and I highly recommend it. It's called The Mom Test. And the quote is, if you had 50K and spent 5K learning, you're running down a dead end. That's actually awesome, because now you can use the rest to find a viable path to your goal. So always remember that just because somebody doesn't like something, or just because you don't, what you're noticing is that people don't really have a need for something, that's not always bad news. In fact, you can learn so much more, pivot, choose a slightly more tangential problem space, whatnot, when you learn that what you have in mind isn't exactly viable, right, at that point. And then finally, also, it's never too late to start with your customer discovery. I see this often where founders tend to like wait until they have something to show to their users. And so they want to like scramble and put something together, even if it's low code, even if it's prototypes, but they want to have something to show to their users. But I think I genuinely believe that that's really not how you should approach it, right? In fact, the first part of the initial days of your startup, you really want to spend time validating the problem space. And in that sense, you can literally start customer discovery the day an idea pops in your mind, right? And only once you've spoken to users, understood how they're doing certain things, and the problem that you're assuming is a problem is actually a problem, only then you want to start kind of brainstorming solutions and validating solutions and whatnot. But you want to spend the first few weeks or whatever time it takes you to actually be really confident about the problem space you're solving for, before you start even like putting together prototypes or designs or low code or whatnot. All that comes really later in the stage. So don't wait until you have something to show. You can really start having those discussions with your potential customers. Like I said, as soon as there's an idea or a problem space you get interested in, start validating it and start kind of refining it, right, as you go through those interviews. And only once you've reached a point where you feel more confident is when you start brainstorming and validating solutions. And then at a later stage, once you feel more confident about your solution is when you start kind of really getting into the details about, is this intuitive, is this usable, and whatnot. But the first step should always be about validating the problem space, and you don't really need to show stuff while you're doing that. So that's a pretty important one too. And then, okay, the next bit I want to talk about is around asking insightful questions. I do believe that if you aren't asking the right kind of questions, you're probably doing customer discovery the wrong way. And if you're doing it the wrong way, honestly, sometimes it's better to not do it at all than do it wrong. Because when you do it not the right way, you're basically just trying to validate like a false positive, right? And which doesn't help anybody. You again at that point you're just validating, which is not a great use of your time. So to do it the right way, you need to be asking the right questions. And again, a few tips on how do you make sure you're asking the right questions are, the first rule of thumb I like to keep in mind is that it isn't about your idea, it's about the customer, especially when you're starting out and you're just trying to like understand the problem space. You want to spend as little time talking about your idea, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes at the end, but you want to spend most of the time up front really just understanding your customers. What are their goals? What are some of their habits? How are they currently doing things? Which is, what are their current workflows? Understand what their constraints are, challenges are, workarounds are, what motivates them, etc. So in the realm of that problem space, you really want to just understand your customer, and you don't want to bring up your idea until really towards the end of the interview to get a sense of how how that idea resonates with them. But the first bit is really just about understanding them. So instead of, hey, do you think this is a good idea? You really want to reframe the way you ask that question to be, hey, with this, how does this idea basically solve the pain points you mentioned earlier in the conversation? Right? It's always bring it back to the user, or like, hey, I have a business idea. Can I run it by you? Because people usually want to be nice, and so they're always going to be like, yeah, that's a great idea. But or they don't know better, right? Like they are not the ones who are going to tell you whether to build something or not. That's a decision you have to take as a founder. All they can tell you is about themselves, right? How are they currently doing things? And so again, the questions you want to ask are around, hey, I wanted to understand how you currently do X. Can you walk me through, or can you walk me through how you currently do it? Tell me about what's working, what's been challenging. So again, you're reframing the questions to be about the user and not about the idea. Hopefully, if you keep this rule of thumb in mind, it'll help you always kind of evaluate whether your question is a good one or not. The minute it talks about the idea, you're probably going a little bit more off track than you need to be. The next one that I think again is um, like a rule of thumb is, focus on extracting stories about like past behavior, so past actions or past decisions. A lot of times we tend to just ask the user, hey, would you do this? But people are not great at predicting their own future decisions. And we don't know if they're always going to do what they say, right? But when we understand how they've done certain things in the past, that's where I think a lot of the good insights lie, for two reasons. One, when you ask questions about the past, then it's easier for the user to give you better answers, right? Because now they just have to like recall a past incident and give you more details about it rather than like guess their future behavior, which nobody can do well. um, and also when you try and understand, hey, why was it that the last time you chose X over Y? Tell me about how you made that decision. Then you're really understanding, okay, what was important to them when making that decision? What were some of the questions and dilemma that went through their head? What was the final convincing factor that pushed them to choose X over Y? So now you're getting so much more richer insights about the user and what matters to them rather than just some future guessing, right? So again, you want to avoid asking questions like, hey, would you buy a product which has X features, or would you consider paying for a solution that would solve your problem, right? Again, all future questions and nobody really knows how to answer them. A good way to reframe these questions is, hey, tell me about the last time you bought something to help with your challenges, right? And walk me through the entire decision making journey. So now you're really getting into the details, and as you all know, right, like the devil is in the details. So you want to understand like the smaller aspects of their entire journey to understand how they're making decisions. Or when was the last time you looked into solutions for your problem? What considerations did you make before selecting the solution? Did you consider paid options? Why or why not? So now you're opening up the floor to get a lot richer data than you would if you were just asking questions around future behavior. So very important to ground your interviews in kind of past stories, rather than or past or present, right? Like, hey, why is it that you're using this instead of that today is also a good question, but you want to refrain about asking questions about the future. Um, and then finally, it's important to go from like very generic feedback to more concrete examples. Again, because a lot of times customers don't always know what they need, or they don't always they're not always very good at giving the right kind of feedback, so you have to like nudge them with the right kind of questions. So don't take everything they say for the word. It's important to ask follow-up questions to really understand the how and the why and the what behind those generic statements. So like, hey, I think this is a really cool idea is a very generic statement, right? And in these type of situations, or hey, I think adding A and B features would make this even better. Again, very generic statements. And in these situations, it's okay to kind of politely challenge your customers' responses. Like, oh, it's a really cool idea. Oh, okay, great. What about it do you think makes it useful? You just mentioned all of these different challenges. How do you think this idea solves for your challenge? So you're now making it a lot more kind of concrete, to understand, um, if if the idea actually fits into this user's life, or it's just a cool idea and they're probably going to move on and never come back to your product. Again, if there are feature requests that come in, which is great, but you want to kind of follow up and understand why those features are important to them, because again, remember, it's not the user's job to tell you what to build, which features to put in there. That's up to you to decide. They can only tell you what they know, right? Which is their challenges and their goals and whatnot. So again, you can follow up with questions like, hey, can you elaborate a little bit on why you would like those features? How are you currently solving problems that you think these features might solve for you? So you again, you're making the conversation less about the idea and the features and more about the user, but also making it a lot more concrete, for you to get more insightful data. And then Finally, so now that you have all of this data, great feedback from your users, because you've been asking insightful questions with a very open mind. Let's look at what are some ways to start evaluating this feedback, right? And translate it into kind of good product decisions for your startup. Of course, the first thing we want to do is try to look for kind of common themes across your interviews. But in the next few slides, I just want to provide you with some kind of food for thought questions or frameworks that you can use to be a little bit more critical about the feedback that you're evaluating. Um, so again, always very important to kind of go beyond the praise. If all you're taking from that interview is, oh, this person really liked the idea and they're going to use it, then it's a little limited in that sense. So you don't want to just get carried away by the praise, or even, if it isn't a praise, if it's a critical feedback, you don't want to just end there. You want to dig deeper into the data, dig deeper into those conversations that you've had with your users to understand why were they excited about it? How frequently are they running into that idea? How is it better than the existing solutions in the market? Is it saving them kind of significant amount of time or money? What value is it adding to their life, right? So you want to really kind of try to push yourself almost to think about the feedback a little bit more critically by asking some of these questions to your own self after you're done with a set of interviews. The next one is evaluating the criticality of your of the pain point, right? So again, like it's so often we see, hey, I love the product, it solves our problem, but the minute you want you want users to pay for it, then there's an issue. They don't want to do it anymore. So that's why it's really important to understand how critical the pain point is. So to what degree is the pain point disrupting the user's life, right? Is it just minor inconvenience, or it's really kind of taking away a lot of their time, effort, or money trying to like do something? And so now your idea is making that simpler, which is great. But if the pain point isn't as severe, then there's probably you need to think about what's going to motivate them to pay for it. Is your product service a nice to have or a must have? Like what is the impression that you're getting what is the overall impression you get from that conversation, right? And again, a few ways to think about that is it making life significantly easier for them than it currently is? um, how comfortable are they with their current workarounds? So if you're trying to solve for something, they're probably, the customer already has a way of doing it right now. And if there aren't like major discomfort in trying to solve that problem, then they're probably less likely to pay you to solve it, right? So again, you want to think about, hey, if the current workarounds are working pretty well, what is it that's going to make them take that leap of faith and start paying for a service or a solution that I'm providing? And then finally, are they actively looking for other solutions? This is important because if they aren't actively looking for other solutions, then they're probably less likely to use or buy yours, because it to me, it almost says that it's not a critical pain point, which is why they're not actively looking for solutions, or they haven't looked at solutions in the past at all. Then it's kind of telling me something about whether they really care about that problem or not. While that problem exists, there are a lot of problems that I may have in my life, but I may not go about trying to solve all of them, because some are more critical, more urgent, and some are just less critical, or the current ways of how I'm currently solving the problem is working. It's not the most efficient, but it works. And so I don't want to go around looking for solutions to solve that. So here are some questions you can kind of ask yourself after you've done these interviews to understand what is the criticality of that pain point, because then that kind of gives you a sense of how much more likely people are to use it and how much more likely are they to pay for it. And then finally, what would stop customers from using or paying, using your product or paying for it, right? So again, the idea here isn't to be negative, or like, look at your interviews negatively, but it's just one way to be a little bit more critical about the way you analyze the feedback that you've gotten, and like what are some of the MVP features without which the product or service doesn't create value for the customer, or why would they want to pay, why would they want to use your product but maybe they wouldn't be willing to pay for it, or why would they choose you over your competitors. So just again going in with a little bit more of this critical critical kind of angle helps you understand what are the constraints that you're dealing with. Maybe it's that your target market has this problem but they don't really have the kind of budget to pay to be able to solve that problem. Then you have to find something that's cheap enough for them to be willing to pay for it, right? So what constraints are you dealing with? Identify certain MVP features. But also, the more you think about these questions, the more it helps you kind of sharpen your value proposition, in terms of how do I reach this market? How do I market my product? And what is more likely to resonate with my target audience? Um, and that's all that's all I have. Thank you again for tuning in. Of course, I think we have some time for questions, so definitely open to that. And I just have my LinkedIn, my company website, and also my email. If any one of you would like to kind of reach out and chat more about the stuff that we spoke about today. But yeah.
Awesome, Kanika. Thank you. That was really an incredible overview. And I know this is one that entrepreneurs will continue to return to as they're kind of, thinking about, up-leveling their customer discovery process and, ensuring that product market fit. So we already have tons of questions coming in through the live Q&A. So if you are in the audience and you have a question for Kanika, please make sure to drop that in the Q&A box. And we'll be sure to share these links in addition with attendees. So if you wanted to stop sharing your screen, we could go into like a Brady Bunch kind of format. But yeah, let's get these questions started. So I think, in talking about like, going into this process with an open mindset, we have a couple entrepreneurs, wondering more about, how do you define, what is an assumption or like identify your assumptions, and how do you kind of differentiate that from like a more of like a scientific hypothesis of like, I'm wondering if this is going to work. Let's test it out. Can you maybe dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So it doesn't have to be a very scientific hypothesis. This is really just the assumptions that you have in your mind and kind of laying them out so that you know what you're trying to test through these interviews, right? So let's say me as a founder, I am assuming that this is a problem space. This is a problem that my customers go through, potential customers go through on an everyday basis, and it's a large enough problem for them for me to solve. So maybe this is just my first set of assumptions, like I said, when we're very early just trying to validate the problem space. So just write down those assumptions, that what do you assume the problem is, and why do you think that's a problem. And so when you're doing your first set of customer interviews, you're just trying to understand whether that's true, whether that assumption that this is a problem is actually a problem, right? So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have like very scientific hypotheses. It's really just becoming a little bit more self-aware to even understand that these are assumptions, the stuff that you think, hey, this is my idea. That's an assumption, right? Your idea is an assumption. So it's just about kind of putting that down on paper, or typing it out so that you know that these are all the things you're assuming. So now you're going into your customer discovery, trying to see if those still hold true. Hopefully that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so important because, it influences the way that you frame your language. If you're going into a conversation assuming that something is already true, that's gonna, change the way you might ask a question during that customer discovery process and, influence the outcome. So yeah, I think that's super helpful. Love that. We have another question here. A couple kind of just like about like logistics of
Yeah.
conducting customer discovery. So, like, from the get-go, what strategies, are there to really, find the right people to
Hmm.
interview in the first place? And what is the best method for capturing feedback? Is it best practice, to set up a video recording, to take notes? How are you kind of capturing that feedback?
Yeah, those are both great questions. So the first one around how do you find the right people, or how do you even know if you're interviewing the right people, is you want to start with kind of zooming in into one target customer segment. So maybe the idea that you have, you think is something that solves for these five different types of customer segments. Great, but when you're doing one round of customer discovery, which is usually talking to about 4 to 5 people, you want to zoom into one specific target. And if you see that the feedback that you're hearing, or what you're learning is kind of very kind of disjoint, and you're not able to kind of come to specific themes, then at that point it may mean that you're talking to a very large customer segment, right? Like imagine you have something for students, but now students can be college students, it can be school students, it can also be adults trying to learn something new. So now if you start talking to like across the board like students, then you're probably going to hear very different needs and challenges and constraints come up. So if that's what's happening, then you need to kind of track back and think about, okay, how do I narrow down my segment even further, right? So then you're going to start hearing specific themes from that segment. So usually that's what I would suggest. You start out with understanding who your target customers are, and then try to like slice them down to like smaller segments as much as possible, so that you're able to target one segment at a time, and get really rich insights about that one segment, and then move to the next ones. um, and then, sorry, oh yeah, the next question was around how do we capture feedback. So sometimes we do video recordings, and it's okay. If you want to do that, that's fine, or you can audio record. Sometimes people get a little bit conscious when you're doing that. So just check with the person you're talking to and see if they're comfortable for you to do that. Or even if they say yes, but they're a bit hesitant, then like avoid doing it, because then they may change the way they answer certain things, right? So if you just gauge what the comfort level is, you don't want just the recording to kind of influence the way they answer the questions. And in terms of taking notes, again, like for me, it's I just make some really quick. So I usually go in with a set of questions I want to ask. Not that you have to follow it to the T. You can obviously kind of change them as per how the conversation's going. But try to see if you can make like very quick notes for each of those questions that you've listed out, right? Whether you write it down or you type it out, in case if you're not able to record. But if there's comfort from the customer to record, and if they seem cool with it, then again, I think also audio recording sometimes is better than video, because they're a little less conscious about how they're looking, etc. So if video is something that doesn't work, you can just audio record it on your phone. But yeah, I think those would be a few ways I would go about doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's super helpful. I think just, in terms of like when this process is new to people, just understanding kind of best practices around conducting is super important.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have an interesting question here. Scenario to pose to you. What do you think about the Dropbox method, as they call it, where you create a video or PowerPoint of your solution and ask customers whether this is attractive enough for them to join a wait list?
Yeah. Again, right, I would personally be a bit skeptical if that's the only thing you're doing. Because again, if you think about me as a customer, if you send me that video, really, like, what is it going to take for me to say, yeah, sure, I'll join the wait list, right? Like that, the investment from my end is very low. And so my likelihood to say yes is very high. But just because I say yes doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that's really in the long run, I'll still keep using it if needed. I'll start paying for it, right? So you want to understand whatever it is that you're offering. If from the customer side, the barrier is very low, like sure, I'll just give you my email and sign up for a wait list. uh, I'll do it, but then does it really tell you much about how do I actually think about the idea? Probably not, right? So again, I'd suggest like earlier on, or maybe you already have a product, which is fine, but like try and see if there are ways for you to just understand the customer and their workflows. At some point, when you start seeing a certain problem, even if the customer is not aware of it, when you start seeing that problem over and over again, you start to become more confident that, hey, this is a real problem, and we're going to be able to solve this. So I would really, again, just go back to, hey, how is my customer doing certain things, and how do I try to solve it, rather than giving them something and asking. Maybe at that point you're like, hey, would you pay $5 to use this for a month? Then maybe it's giving you a little bit more insight into, are people willing to invest more time and energy? Or hey, would you change what you're currently using to try this new thing out for a month? Then it's a little bit more effort on my side as a customer, where I'm having to like change certain things around. Maybe if I have a team, I'm asking them to try, not use the current thing but use a new thing. So there's at least some level of effort that goes on from my end, so you really know if they're willing to do it or not. If it's just signing up for waitlist or something very low effort, then it's not giving you so much insights, really. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point, thinking of it from that perspective, because I feel like ultimately, this process, will impact, your lead generation strategy.
Yeah,
If you've really identified the right market for your solution. And so you want to kind of go about that in a way that will result in valuable insights
yeah,
versus just quantity of insights. Um,
absolutely.
so I love that. What else do we have? Lots of questions coming in here. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Um, we have a couple questions about user experience researchers and kind of what, that position and, the potential value of having, somebody fill that role for your business. Could you maybe, if you have any insight there, what could be the value of, employing, to some degree, a user experience researcher, and, how that role kind of, can work in alignment with your sales strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So from what I understand, it depends on the stage of the startup that you're at, right? A lot of times when it's early, you're just starting out, maybe you don't have the budget to have someone with you full time to do everything for you, right? Which is why I think the approach we take, even with my company, is for that, then I work more as just helping them, like I said, set up customer discovery strategies in a iterative way, and really just empowering the founder to do it on their own, just because there's budget constraints. But also I feel like when you're starting out, you also want to be a lot more involved with your customers and getting to know them better. There's always a lot of value in doing that. So if there's budget constraints and if you have the time, then it's good to be able to do it on your own. And maybe you can have someone like a UX researcher kind of just guide you along the process instead of like doing everything for you. But again, obviously, if you have the budget and you're able to get somebody to do a project for you, it's always great because there's way less bias, right? If I'm coming in as a third party, as a third person, I'm not as invested in the idea as you are, which is great, because then I'm able to kind of really understand all the ways that this idea may not work, or what are some of the changes that need to be made. So I'd say there's definitely value in getting someone on board. To what capacity depends on your budget and and the time you have. But I do like, at least earlier on, like I said, having someone who's just kind of helping you make sure you're on the right track, and you're running customer discovery the right way, right? You're not kind of making some of these mistakes that often founders make. And then once you feel confident and you have a whole system set up, then you're able to kind of do it on your own and kind of replicate a lot more. But yeah, having someone do it for you is also great if you have the budget for that.
Uh, yeah, I think that's great. Really important considerations. And I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs who are in those kind of first years of business. So definitely, just important to keep in your mind as you move along with the process.
Yeah.
Um, we have an interesting question here that I definitely want to address. This person, the example they give, they're in an education setting where, there are kind of multiple customer layers. They have, principals like administrators, they have teachers, and then they have students. And so I think this person is, asking, when you're kind of going through the customer discovery process and collecting feedback, and you're evaluating that feedback, how do you kind of approach, a conflict there, when you're kind of working to um, solve problems for more than one, target audience, I guess, but, for the benefit of all.
Um, Sorry, so is this about like conflict in terms of the needs that you're hearing and how to make a product decision, or conflict in
I think,
um
maybe conflict isn't the right word, but, this person is saying, we need feedback from teachers, principals, and other decision makers, and at the same time, students are the ones who are best equipped to provide feedback about their user experience. So how do
yeah.
you kind of, you know, approach that conflicting
Yeah,
feedback?
yeah, makes sense. Yes. I think in that situation, while the students are the ones who are most equipped to give you feedback on how are they using certain things, at least earlier on, especially when you're trying to validate the problem space, right? Who you really want to be talking to is the decision makers, because finally it's them who are going to decide whether they want to invest money, time, effort, trying to like use your solution. So I would think again, it depends on the specific exact situation, but I would think you want to start with talking to the decision makers and seeing if, like I said, are they currently looking out for solutions for this problem? Have they explored paid solutions at all or not? So you're trying to like understand if there's really a big need for that problem space, and if they're really kind of actively doing something to solve it, right? And once you have that confidence that hey, it seems like they're willing to kind of invest in this problem space, is when then you can start talking to the people who are going to actually be using the solution to refine it further and whatnot. But you ideally want to start with the decision makers to get a sense of are they even willing to invest, because it's not the students making those decisions, right? So I would
Totally.
probably start there first. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um,
or sorry, just
yeah,
to
go
add,
ahead.
like it's important to talk to the students also. Maybe you're doing a little bit of both, the decision makers and the students. Students, just to kind of refine your problem space more as you talk to them more and more. But ideally, for hey, should I invest in this idea or not, is more about how the conversation with the decision makers go. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Um, we have another question here that I think is interesting. Asking, about, I think for this conversation, we've mainly been focusing on, what customer discovery looks like for paying customers. Does that look any different when you're trying to, gain active users? I think this person is kind of talking about like engagement on like, social media platforms and the like. Does it kind of look the same, or are there, other considerations that founders should be aware of?
Oh, okay. So this is more about like you already have a set of paying customers, but now you want to target a different user segment and see if you can get them like maybe get them be your own customers, is it?
I
Uh,
think this is a matter of somebody paying for the product versus actually paying for it and then making use of it.
hmm.
Um,
Um,
so I think this person is kind of trying to gear their customer discovery process in a way that will help them, you know, target those who will not just pay for their solution, but will actually, find value in it and make good use of it, if that makes sense.
yeah. I don't see that as very different. I think the approach to customer discovery still remains the same because again, you're just trying to understand if that product is valuable and if it's you know again like targeting some very critical pain points for the user. And to me also if somebody's paying for your product, it indirectly also means that they do see value in it. Because otherwise I'm not sure why somebody would be willing to kind of pay for it. But in either case, I think the approach to customer discovery remains more or less the same. You're just trying to understand again how critical is a certain pain point and or a challenge for that customer, and how is your solution working for them to help kind of alleviate some of those challenges.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, we have another entrepreneur here asking, you know, what kind of happens, if maybe you thought that you identified the right target market, and through further research, you've kind of realized that a different target market would, find great value in what you have to offer. Do you have any insight, in kind of making that transition for your business, and, just applying the new customer insights that you gain, to make, those kinds of strategic decisions that will help your business continue to grow?
Yeah. So I think that's a great point. And if your customer discovery is kind of leading you to that solution, or to the fact that, hey, I've been targeting maybe the wrong type of customer so far, I need to be going after somebody else, or sometimes it's a little bit of both, right? Like, hey, I have this existing set of customers, but there's also this other set of customers that are that may see value in my product. So first of all, it's a great thing that you're able to kind of identify that through the customer discovery. And the way to approach that again is, if it's about making product decisions, maybe you can so I've heard, and this is what happened once, like, I was working with a startup and they had this product which was being used by a lot of students, but then the minute it came time to like pay for it, they were not willing to pay. But then as they started doing more customer discovery, they realized that, hey, this product can be used in this business setting and they are more likely to be paying customers because it's a business and they have income and whatnot. And so then they started kind of moving towards, kind of almost like tweaking the product so that it works better for those business owners rather than those students who they were targeting so far, right? So in terms of making those decisions, maybe of course one way to think about is where is the revenue more likely to come from, and if it's a little bit of both, and hopefully, and if it's very conflicting needs, then it becomes a matter of like, do you want to like show different things to different people? Is that worth the investment or not, for how much you're gonna make, how much money you're gonna make, etc. But yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think that's
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
no, I think that's super helpful. Um, and I think we have time for one or two more questions. I think this one, what this person is asking is interesting, and it's, it might seem simple, but I think it's something that founders can often overthink. Um, how do you know when you've talked to enough people? How do you know when you have enough information to kind of, then go back and, do that evaluation process and
Yeah.
really know that you have enough data to now make informed decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So usually from research, we know that the minute you've spoken to like 7 to 8 people, you've already learned like 80% of the things that you need to learn, right? So at some point, then you start kind of re-hearing the same things over and over again. And so so when you feel like oh, okay, that the new information that I'm getting out of these interviews is starting to like decrease over time, and then you're just hearing the same things over and over again, is probably when you know that you've spoken to enough people. With startups and customer discovery, though, like 5 is a good number as a general rule of thumb. If you've spoken to 5 people from one very specific user segment, that's already good, because by the time you talk to the sixth, seventh, eighth person, you're likely going to start hearing very similar things again. And this is what we know from research, right? So just to kind of save yourself time, think about like 5 to 6 at most per round, and that should be sufficient.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great rule of thumb. As you know, for entrepreneurs who, haven't, again, are new to the process. I think that's super helpful. Um, and then one last question. We have a couple entrepreneurs, just wondering if any additional tools or resources, that you find to be helpful in your work in terms of supporting the customer discovery process.
Um, I think tools at an earlier stage, not so much because it's really just talk to your customers, right? And do it in person if you can, which I know is not always easy. Otherwise, do it virtually, but it's really just getting your hands dirty, talking to people. Resources, there are a few kind of good books out there that I think talk about like UX research, but from a startup perspective. So which I think are great. The one I mentioned earlier in the talk was the Monk test. And I see there's one question around sprint also. So there's also this book called The Sprint, which is basically designed for startups. It's a 1 week sprint, which basically helps you go from like a very rough, vague idea to like making decisions and talking to customers on the last day. So it was a method developed by researchers at Google Ventures at the time when they used to work for startups under the Google Ventures incubation. So that's a really good book too if you want to like see if there are ways you can run your own sprint. There's also maybe I don't know if there's a way to like share some of the links, but
Yeah, we can definitely share, links to any additional resources after the event, but that's super helpful. Um, Awesome. So, Kanika, this has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for providing, all of this insight and guidance, in doing, the customer discovery process right. If you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom that you wanted to leave with the audience, what would that be?
I think, it's probably a little repetitive at this point, but like really uh, just put aside your biases and go in with like a really clean, fresh mind. Very difficult to do. I know it's not as easy as it sounds, but if we go in with those biases, we just want to hear what we want to hear, and we're not open to kind of the newer information. So that would be, I think, the biggest one, especially founders, since they're doing their own customer discovery. Just make sure you're doing it with an extremely open mind, and you're receptive to all the bad news early on, because better now than later. So yeah.
Awesome, Kanika. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time too.
Awesome. And to our audience, we'd love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view using that link that's going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.